How ancient is non-heteronormative sexuality?
That's
Let's look.
such a good place to hit it off because there's so many different directions you could go with that. I think first and foremost, it's important to appreciate that, like, if there's an animal out there that has sex, you're probably also going to see homosexual sex there as well. This goes for things that are incredibly, what we would consider primitive. So, arthropods and different kinds of fish and things of that nature. And it's most prevalent in the mammals. So, yes, non heteronormative sexuality is super, super ancient because we see it in the basal organisms that we have today. And it's only continued to get more and more complex in both the reason for its existence and kind of the minutia of it. Why is it that we see homosexual interactions in mammals, and how does it differ from the kinds of interactions that we see in something like bed bugs, which, as as horrifying as bed bugs are in and of themselves, they get frisky all across the board. So I respect the hustle with the bed bugs, but um
That's not the visual that I was expecting to start the show with. Okay, no, but the reason we talk about this, and I get this question a lot, it's like, why do people in the atheist YouTube community always talk about sexual issues? And the reason we push back on it is because they won't leave us alone, right? And
oh
how many
yeah,
times have we heard an apologist say that anything other than reproductive monogamous sex is not natural, right?
ah
And that's the word that they use for it, not natural. So
every
let's
time.
let's start with that. Let's start.
Yeah,
What do you have to say with the idea that non-reproductive sex is not natural?
I mean, yeah, that's completely absurd, and it's turned on its head just by simply glancing for 10 seconds at any area of the animal kingdom. We see it everywhere, and it's the big elephant in the room is that very few organisms pair bond for life. I mean, monogamous sex is like the extreme outlier in the animal kingdom. Homosexual sex is again very common. Whether it's in very basal organisms because there's confusion going on, or it's a natural and important part of social bonding and cohesion that we see in many social mammals, both of these things pervade the animal kingdom. Which is why it's really funny to me that we hear, religious individuals come out and say stuff like, these are the same guys who will be like, evolution's not real. The earth was created 6,000 years ago and we were created as is. And then they turn around and they're like, heh, well, if it's not natural, then it must not be good. And it's like, okay, pick a lane. You can't have your cake and eat it too, you know?
Well, and for my brief amount of time, you've been studying this for longer than I have, but in my brief amount of time trying to understand the young Earth creationist mind and the way that they present their
No,
apologetics,
no.
it seems almost like a comical oversimplification of everything.
Oh,
Where if
man.
you just take a little tiny look, a little bit closer at what they seem to present as being obvious, the way it comes across to me is like flat earthers will say it's obvious that the earth is flat. Well, no, but if you do a little bit of investigation, you will find out that our initial perceptions are incorrect.
Well,
And
yeah.
so you do see this behavior around in the animal kingdom.
Yeah, 100% Puck. You nailed that. I mean, biology is inherently unintuitive. Biology is a very, very messy field of science, particularly and primarily because it's dictated by natural selection and random mutation. So it's like it's naturally going to be a little bit convoluted. But yeah, I mean, if this were a stream about young Earth creationism and like what goes into that, we'd be here for like several millennia, honestly. There's just so maybe 6,000 millennia or 6 millennia.
Ooh.
Ooh, uh-oh.
Oh, you see that's why I like exactly what buttons to push. I'm sure they heard you from over in like creationism web over there. Hearing you
Oh,
say
yeah.
6,000 years, they're on their way over here to call in
Oh,
and hassle you right now.
hey, my haters only make me more powerful.
Okay, so you touched on this. Let's go to this really quick. Just when we speak to not any young Earth creationists who might be here in this episode, how could non-procreative sexual activity be consistent with what they call evolutionism?
Yeah, I mean, that's a perfect way of kind of phrasing it, right? For a long time, homosexuality was considered to be this Darwinian paradox because non-procreative sex doesn't lead to offspring. So inherently, it's a fitness strain. Like that is a concept that would be very well understood, very very promoted in evolutionary biology until somewhat recently, when people who were out in the field came back and they were like, "Listen, there's a lot of gay stuff going on out there." And everyone was kind of like, okay, well, why? What's the benefit here for the individual if the goal of evolution is to pass your genes on? What role is it that homosexual sex could play? And the answer is that it's inherently related to sociality. This is why it's considered, they call it like the sociosexual hypothesis. So organisms that exhibit primarily or at least frequent homosexual behavior, they tend to be mammals first and foremost. Like we see a ton of social mammals exhibiting homosexual behavior, and I think it's fair to say that almost always it's for the purposes of social bonding or lowering tensions. This is especially the case in primates. But for instance, even some of the more masculine animals that we consider like these, he-man, woman haters, like the lions, the big maned masculine lions, 8% of the mountings that males perform are going to be homosexual. That's like 1 in 10 about. We see similar numbers in things like American bison, giraffes. Sometimes rams have exclusive pair bonded male partners. And the reason is because the overarching reason is like, okay, well, for the group, this is going to increase stability. The happier everyone is, the less fighting there's going to occur. And the more that everyone can pay attention to either feeding the group or looking out for things that are trying to feed on the group. So inherently, there is this beneficial social aspect to homosexuality, whether it boils down to just keeping everybody happy, or in the more complex animals like your hominids. So that would be us, gorillas, chimps, bonobos, orangs, things like that. They can even lend a hand in raising the offspring. And we'll get to this later, but that actually boosts their fitness as well. When you get an extra pair of hands in there to help keep an eye on the youngsters, whether or not they're right down your lineage or lineage adjacent, that's a huge fitness boost for the group and for the individual.
There are a number of people who watch this show, and when they're watching, they're not really watching. They have it on in the background, or they'll be listening in podcast form and not able to see this. For those of you who are doing that, I strongly encourage you to find this episode on YouTube and turn on the background. In the background of Erica's screen here, never mind that Erica is just fun to watch as she speaks, but there is a large number of skulls back there. We're talking about someone who really knows what she's talking about. There you go. Let's get that nice
Be
one up in the
careful
image.
with asking about the skulls, Puck. I'll turn around and start handling them and telling you all about them, because that is my greatest desire. I just want to sit in front of the camera and tell you about the skulls.
No, that's good that we have people who are so passionate about this. I just want to encourage people, if you typically do not watch the show, this is the show to actually come in here and watch. We're having a lot of fun here. One thing though, I got to go back on this, because it is a fallacy to assume that just because something is natural,
Yeah.
it means that it's good, right? We know that just because it's natural, that's not a good enough reason. So what can we learn though about human behavior when we see these behaviors in other species?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. You're totally correct. Murder is natural. Chimps go around killing each other all the time, and bonobos less so. But just because it's natural doesn't mean it's good. This is strictly in response to this idea that it is definitively unnatural, and that's demonstrably false. I mean, seriously, you can pay, again, 10 seconds of attention to anything in nature, and you'll see that homosexuality is everywhere. This does tell us a ton about ourselves, because humans, we're primates, we're catarrhines, we're apes, we are members of the animal kingdom. And looking at our closest living relatives, or even just members of our order, other primates, or members of our class, we can find out a lot about what it is that's beneficial about certain human behaviors for the group. And we can also figure out, well, why did they evolve in the first place? And I think that's really important to moving forward. So you can't necessarily understand how to move towards the future if you don't understand a little bit about your past.
No, that's fantastic. And that's why, like, when I first we were coming up with topics, you and I sat down and we basically did a whole show, just you and me just talking. And and I just realized that the problem is not going to be coming up with enough to talk about. The problem was going to be how much is going to be left on the table here.
Right.
So we are going to do our very best to have you've given me a large number of sources over here, and we'll put it down in the description or in the comments, so that anybody can start researching this stuff. But I guess that's another question, that a lot of us don't have your background in science and primatology. So when these questions do come up, these difficult questions that some of us get posed at the Thanksgiving room table about, well, evolution can't explain this.
Ah.
Where do we start? Where do us lay people start to get the ammunition to fight back with these conversations?
Yeah, I mean, funny enough, that's kind of why I picked YouTube, is because YouTube is such a great resource for people to kind of get a basic lay understanding of a lot of these concepts. I mean, in a nutshell, has some amazing Kurzgesagt, has some amazing videos with regard to like, okay, what is evolution? What is human evolution? What do we have to support these ideas? And what do we have to support the idea that humans aren't apart from nature, but we are beautifully a part of it? So you can really just get the basics from that. I'm hoping, fingers crossed, to shill for myself here. As I do like my first TA session here in the fall, I'm hoping to do a series on my own channel that's like, hey, here's a really basic understanding of like undergraduate biological anthropology or human evolution. But really and truly, YouTube's got some incredible sources for getting a basic understanding of it. And I promise you, your aunt and uncle at the Thanksgiving table will not have the basics understood. I mean, these are the same folks who are like, "Oh, why are there still monkeys if we came from monkeys?" Okay.
And that just shows a lack of understanding of the actual processes that are involved, right? And
Right. Yeah, of course.
but see, that's one of the shocking things about groups like AIG and groups like Christian,
Yeah.
because they have such a huge body of work that just by the size of it adds a little bit of legitimacy. Not
Well,
only that, but there's so much of it that it becomes difficult to start to know, where do we fight back against this?
Well, and isn't it curious that they've got their own research journal of which the contents are never submitted to conventional peer-reviewed resources, right? I mean, if these guys are really coming out with all this support genetically of, oh, mitochondrial Eve lived only 6,000 years ago, well, why isn't Dr. Nathaniel Jeanson punting that to nature? Or PLOS. And the answer is because, and this is increasingly evident, I think a layperson to an expert alike can see this. Take a piece of work that someone has published to Nature or PLOS or Science, any of those, and compare it to what you see in the Answers Research Journal. These two things are like looking at an essay you wrote in third grade compared to something you submitted to like Lit 101 in undergrad. And they are leagues apart. So, I mean, yes, it can be intimidating, but it's a smokescreen.
No, and I'll agree to that, but it's just so robust that you counter something, and by the time you counter something, the person that you're talking to pulls up about 5 or 6 other links and sends that and adds that to the Facebook conversation.
Right. Yeah,
I'm
what
sure
what
there's
is
some people who are nodding along. It's like, yeah, I've had those
what is it?
conversations.
It's Brandolini's law, right? It's like if you can say so much BS in one sentence that like the time that it takes to debunk every single minute point of that is going to take you far longer than it'll take them to come up with 20 other
Yeah.
bogus sources,
And the
that
thing
you
is, like, there are answers, there are refutations to all this crazy stuff that they say, but they're not always a simple explanation. Like sometimes they'll think of something, it's like they just blurt it off in an article, and to counter that takes a good amount of time and a good amount of knowledge. So as lay people, as people who don't have your knowledge and expertise as to where to go, give us some ammunition here. Like, where can we go to start fighting back against what we hear? Are there any good resources for this?
Oh, for
Aside from you, because you're a great resource already.
for
But
for
aside from
young
you,
Earth.
what else do we have?
Yeah, for young Earth creationism
Yeah.
specifically? Oh, yeah, there are I mean, the debate evolution subreddit is excellent. Obviously, Talk Origins is the classic. Talk Origins is and I was saying this to Puck earlier, actually. It's funny because they haven't updated their site in, like, a decade, but all their refutations still work because the creationists are saying the same stuff. So your Talk Origins is going to be great. Natural Historia is a blog online. Age of Rocks is another one specifically for geology that's going to be excellent. And some of these individuals are religious as well, which I find particularly interesting because they understand that your faith and science, like there are aspects of them that can go hand in hand. You don't have to reject conventional science to have a faith. It's just You can't be a young Earth creationist and be adherent to conventional science, to what we observe. As for YouTube channels, I have a ton of friends online, conventional scientists, colleagues who are informally and formally trained. Creation Myths is excellent if you want to talk about like the genetic stuff. Dapper Dino does a lot with relation to their dinosaur claims. Their Science Side Up is excellent if you want to look at climatology and how they butcher all of climatology, because of course they're climate change deniers. Why wouldn't they be?
No, Professor Dave Explains is one of my go-tos also.
Professor Dave is excellent.
Yeah.
Yeah, he does an excellent job. Aaron Raw has an excellent series as well. I'm sure everyone here knows Aaron's work as well. And I'm trying to think.
Okay, so while you're thinking about that, I'm going to ask you the same question because I love science educators, and I love the people who are putting themselves out there as science educators. But one of the questions that I like to ask every single one that I get is, there's a certain point where what you're talking about far exceeds any of my knowledge, right? And I just have to, and you're going to hear this is an apologetic talking point too. You're just taking it on faith that
Ah,
what they're saying is real and accurate. So, Erica, how can we trust what you and other science educators say and not just have that be blind faith on our part?
oh, yeah. Yeah, well, there's an excellent text, 2 actually excellent texts out there that I wanna recommend to folks who really wanna dig their teeth into this question. One is called The Death of Expertise, and the other one is called The War on Science. And it's essentially what you're asking, why is it that we trust the scientists? Well, for the same reason that you call a plumber when you've got issues with your sink, or you go to a specific kind of doctor if you've got an issue with your eye, you go to an optometrist versus someone going to a neurologist if it's an issue with your brain. And that's because no one can be an expert at everything. Our society is built around understanding that some people are going to be and devote more time towards certain kinds of expertise, whereas others are going to go other directions with their expertise. We rely on that trust in a way that's evident in our daily lives. You trust that your car manufacturer built a car that's going to get up and run. You trust your doctor that the treatments that you get are indeed going to work. And the fact that we're still here is excellent support for the idea that, like, yeah, trusting the experts tends to work. And the funny thing is that the folks who are saying, "Oh, well, you're doing it on blind faith," well, that's what they do too. I mean, they trust their car manufacturer when they drive around. They trust their doctor when they get an X-ray. They make these same sort of concessions that just involve, or that are just necessary for living in the modern world. This division of labor is what defines why humans are so successful. We know how to partition out work to people who are good at what they're good at. I mean, hunter gatherer is like what we call your kind of first anatomically modern Homo sapiens societies. The hunters hunted, and by the way, that wasn't, those gender roles were not as strict as we were previously taught to believe. That information is coming forward as well. And your gatherers gathered, but the folks who were good at their jobs took those jobs and performed them, and lo and behold, 300,000 years later, here we are. Trusting experts is, it's not blind faith, it's the educational system in action.
See, this is why I like working with the shows that I work with. This one and on Truth Wanted, plug, and on
Plug, chill.
nonprofits, plug. Because these are, where we take the thinking from religious people, and we really put it where the rubber meets the road, right? And we say this is
Right.
not just the religious thinking. This is how it affects us in our daily lives. And right now still in the middle of a pandemic where a lot of people aren't trusting the scientific advice and looking at the
Please
CDC,
get
who,
vaccinated.
they've probably
Please
done
get
a lot
vaccinated.
more research into it than someone who's just scrolling through Facebook. There's a good reason to trust, not just on blind faith, but the fact that they have more access to the materials, they have more people dedicated to it. Yeah, they're probably going to be able to do more research than you.
We're
It's probably a good idea to defer to their
Yeah,
decisions.
we're talking hundreds of thousands of hours of collective study amongst people who are doing nothing but what science does best, which is find out the truth about the world around us by making predictions and testing them. That's inherently different from blind faith, which is, it's taken on the hope or the belief that something will happen, not the active evidence that it is destined to, effectively, by what we understand about the natural world. Yes, please get vaccinated. Everyone get vaccinated.